We're in Pineland today. We're on Pine Island, which is in southwest Florida. We're in the archaeological site of, which was known during the time of the Spaniards as Tampa, oddly enough. Mosquitoes are horrendous right now. I don't think they come through in terms of being able to hear them or even see them on the camera, but they're everywhere. I refuse to put my mask on. We're on top of what is known as Brown's Mound Complex. It's the name that we've given it in recent history. The Calusa, as we know from previous studies, was a 3,000, at the time of the Spanish exploration, was a 3,000-year-old civilization. Spanish came in the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries, and through that contact exposed the Calusa and all the other Indians of Florida during various periods of time to their diseases, with which they, or of which, or from which they had no immunity. So they all died, basically. And as they were dying, they were all in the, it didn't happen overnight, it didn't happen in 100 years, it happened over a couple 100-year period. During the time of that dying, the Creek and Yamasee and some of the other Indians from the southeastern United States essentially invaded Florida, moving away from the English, who were pushing them further and further south, and essentially they conquered their lands and became the Seminoles. So from the early to mid 18th century, we have the ascendancy of what we now know as the Seminole Indians, who are just essentially an amalgamation of black runaway slaves, Creeks, leftover anybody else, Miami, Calusa, Tocobaga, on and on and on. The various Indians who did survive those diseases and were here during the time of the Creek and Yamasee incursions. And again, they became the Seminole Indians. But before that, it's mostly very important, I think, to note that these Indians, these natives, were here at that time and had been here for 3,000 years before. So during the time of the Egyptians were building the pyramids, for example, these people were here building these mounds on the coasts of Florida. These Calusas were all coastal Indians because they were fishermen, and that's where the fish are, is on the coast. So we're not going to take you through the entirety of this complex. It's pretty extensive, but it's extremely important complex and a fascinating place. But because it's so big, it would take a long time, and it would bore the average viewer. So we're just going to see what we can see, and for a few minutes, trying to shake the camera too much. We're on top of this mound. There's all sorts of these interpretive markers, which are very helpful for people that don't know any better. This is an artist's rendering of what one of these villages would have looked like. We don't know for a fact that it was here, but we do know for a fact that these are Indian mounds. These are these mounds that we're standing on, 40, 50, 60 feet high and more, were built by Indians, and from their shell leavings. Now we know that the Indians did not build Pine Island per se, but they did enhance it. Whereas, for example, at Mound Key, Chokoloskee, Fakahatchee Island, just to name a few, and those are the ones that come immediately to mind, they built those from scratch. They just started dumping their detritus from their food, the shell leavings, willy-nilly into a section, and over courses of hundreds and hundreds of years, those became full-out islands. But this is not one of those. This is a legit, from the beginning of creation, barrier island. They just built these mounds on them, and they built canals for transportation, and also, I would imagine, to make it easier to catch fish and shellfish, make it come closer and that sort of thing. So the mounds are practical in nature. They're ceremonial. The big cheese would live on top. The biggest cheese of all would live on the biggest mountain, and just like now. It's always been that way in human experience. So we're just going to highlight this one mound, and then lovely research assistant, hi, and cut it out, and then we're going to go see the rest of them. Mosquitoes are horrendous out here right now. I mean, it's June whatever 3rd, and we're out here in the middle of all this, and it's been raining for like 3 weeks, so these mosquitoes are loving our presence. But again, imagine what it would have been in the mid 18th century, 3,000 years before that. This would have been an area of enormous industry activity, completely deforested. Hey, there's some big old birds up there. I wonder what they are. And just people living their lives, you know, surviving. So, dang, God, these mosquitoes, they're relentless. So we're gonna shut it down and move on. Just it's more difficult to get a view of what this place looks like from just this brief video. It's really worthy of coming out here, really worthwhile to come out here type of a place. So.